How are you all doing today? Great peace. Great peace. I just woke up. Um, Decided, let me go and do some shedding in the backyard, do some podcasting, take care of some bills. And back there, the squirrels, they're eating some peanuts that I laid down yesterday. It's probably all gone. Because I had to fill the refrigerator with a bunch of fruit. And I'm like, this big bag of peanuts is not going to fit in there. So I decided to give it to them. But I want to talk about sentinels. The chocolate-covered people throughout the world. The ones who brought civilization satellites, the ones who brought civilization yield, land, resource, spread, I want to talk about them, The more I go throughout social media, I see classism, I see rhetoric, I see heresy, I see treason, I see xenophobia, I see it. It's like, when you go upon a live stream and they're talking about, genealogy, or they're talking about Amir Indians, or they're talking about indigency, they always have to pick on Africans. They always have to befuddle Africans. It's like Africans are like the punching bag for the world, and again, like, these could be our brothers, our sisters, these could be our uncles, our grandparents, because we inherit the side that was more African, right? It's decided that, you're not us in a way. And I didn't grow up feeling xenophobic towards other group of people. I grew up thinking that everybody was the same, I was the one, like, who would, potentially, right, accept that dating a woman who looked like me didn't necessarily differ between the lines of skin color. But I quickly found out, and you hear the geese, they're flying in the air. Let me see if I can get them. All right, so I don't know what that is about. I don't know why they're flying in a unit. I'm not sure what that's about. Maybe someone needs help. But like, even in nature, right? You see how the classification of things being the same, or things looking the same, or things not only looking the same, but things needing the same. You see how they kind of comprise and not jeopardize the total of who they are, their spirit, right? Geese, right? They need the nature that a swan would, but only in certain differences, right? The way that they communicate, their intellect, right, is different than a swan. It's different than a flamingo. But not to get sidetracked, I'm just like, I'm going through lives, and, I see a live, and, I'm thinking like, like this lady, she's from South America. And I noticed that her skin complexion was a little lighter than the Afro-Brazilians that they originally tuned the people in the diaspora and in the North too, because both of us get information, maybe one after the other or before the other, maybe sooner than the other. But, Brazilians, right? And she has so much negative things to say about Africans coming to Brazil and, how they look at her culture and say it's theirs. And you know how you can have a language like English, right? And you can be honest in your opinion. You may have a little off day that day, but you don't mean any harm or intent. But it's taken as, you're being demonstrative. Like what you're saying is pushy, and that's how English comes off when you're trying to communicate to some people. And it's not even that, right? It's just the fact that when you're speaking, the average person who's listening and who's conversing or talking, their immediate assumption is to make a problem out of what you say. Even if your intent is, in all likeness, to accept you. So if you say, what's up, it's derogatory. And if you arrange an adjective before a verb, it's a problem with it. So like Americans, right, a certain class of people, they have triggers, they have triggers. If you say Melanjan, you say mulatto, you say out the room, it's a trigger. If you say maroon, it's a trigger, and it's the same way for sentinels at times. But this is the thing, though. It's like while we are unaccepting of Africans, the cause is to continue to say you're black, but ignore the fact that they also have their classification in their look, You look at me, you look at a Nigerian, you look at a Senegalese, you put us all in the same room. The first thing you notice is that we all have a deep hue. We all have a color, whether it be, like in my case, a red, like in the Senegalese case, actually, like black, right? Sudanese, blue, But also note that when we are in the same environment where like our colors are balancing evenly, right? We're starting to look the same. Maybe we're having the right equator, the right meridian, the right sunset, the right shade. We tend to all look the same, but you tell a person who may be a little lighter skinned, like, yeah, this person's black, this my brother. It begins to be you're a sellout, they not black, it begins to be that thing. So like a lot of brothers and a lot of sisters, they have to come and take up for the ones who are affected by colorism. They have to take up for them. They have to say, what you're doing is wrong. Or even at times, like you just have to create community with the people who you feel is in your best interest. Like in my case, right? Like I only do business with Africans. I only do like a large percentage of my business throughout the month is with Africans. I get imports from them. I get banking from them, I get resources from them as far as minerals, like your supplements and stuff like that. Apparel, right? Apparel. I always wear my Embiid jersey. I always wear my LeBron James jersey. I always wear my Drew Holiday jersey. I always wear my Rajon Rondo jersey. Sentinel. I do my best and my only best, right, to support what I know and what I feel like is more of importance. even with branding, right? My thing is, in America, with so much political enclave that happens, right? You know, you have Trump freeing political prisoners, and the whole of that thought is that, you know, they get thrown on top of the blackness of America, right? You know, black America, right? This is what this person represents is blackness. But again, you notice that certain enclaves, they have hatred towards people who are African. They have the idea of calling yourself black. Like, you look at everything that we've kind of experienced throughout history, right? The whole conception of having a big mama, the whole conception of having a papa. If something taboo occurred where it's like, you know, my grandmother said she was Indian, you know, that was to get away from her blackness. If it was, you know, she a red bone, it's to get away from your blackness. Like any other taboo things that we hear in the black community. Like, my mama never said she was this, or like taboo stuff, like stuff you knew wasn't an occurrence, but during that time where the conversation was talked about, they made it seem like it was occurring frequently throughout a certain period of time, but it actually wasn't, right? Because, like, I have a mom who, you know, everybody in the family, you know, disregarding their complexion, right? They call her Madeira, because my mother, she was born in the 60s. They call her Madeira, right? Whenever she had a cookout, you would see everybody at her house. When we were in Chicago, you would see everybody at her house. But clearly, right, you know, the idea of family, the idea of having relation to someone, you know, without really knowing them, you know what I mean? Like, you tend to take on a person who you may not even ask a certain question about a certain thing, that if you did during that particular time, you wouldn't have 5 more years with this person to be calling you a Medea or to be calling you a papa. Like, they would have broken loose from you then, you know? Like, when we used to have our cookouts, right? And a lot of people wouldn't even remember this, right? My uncle, his half would be there, you know, his partner, and she would be African, you know what I mean? But like, you ask the people who were at these cookouts about that and who was there, they won't be able to rectify while knowing an occurrence like that actually happened. Like, and this is why I say this, because even on a job setting, family reunion, do we actually take time to get to know the people we're around, the people who we know, or the people who we accept? Do we actually take the time to get to know them? And a lot of people, they protect themselves from actually wanting to have the hard conversations, because they actually know that if they do have a hard conversation, they're going to be offended. They're going to be offended. So, you know, America needs to take a step back and actually think, like, you know, are we gaslighting? Are we pushing buttons? Like, do we actually honor the fact that we come from someone who may be African, you know? The conception that the Gullah Geechee doesn't come from the Kisi is perturbed, you know? It's perturbed. Like, if you can match a photo for photo, accent for accent, and then you continue to say this person is not those people, like, it begins to be like, okay, this person is obviously tormented by their own cognitive dissonance, you know? And this is like why myself, right? I don't pick between sides, you know. I know who I am. You know, I don't sit there and say, you know, I'll accept this person because they hate, or I'll accept this person because they don't hate. Like me, I'm completely neutral because I understand the art of war, you know. I understand the art of war, you know. You don't stand alongside your opponent while glancing at your enemy. You don't do that. You don't do that, you know. I learned this in Chicago, right? You know, coming up as a child. What the children did, it was a clue as to what the adults would do when they got older, which is why my grandfather got me out of that city, you know. Which is why he got me out of that city, because, like, you look at a large part of these cities, right? We're living next to people who are like our cousins, our brothers, our sisters, our uncles, our aunts, you know, our grandmothers. And, you know, their identity is totally separate from us, even if they are dark skinned or not. You know, their identity is totally separate from us. You have people who could be living next to someone who doesn't smoke marijuana, you know, and this person who lives next to someone who smokes marijuana, their environment are infected. They live next to someone who drinks beer and alcohol, their environment is infected. They live next to someone who hate, their environment is infected. So I can go into mortgage policy, banking policy. It's all going to be the same. We're all going to get the same answers using our logic. But I side with Sentinels, and it's for a number of reasons. It's for a number of reasons because of what I've seen over the years and living in America and living in inner cities and living in suburbs. From what I've seen, you know, the view of us being completely the same on our politics, that's just not correct. You know, from what I've seen, it's just not correct, you know. Not losing focus and thinking about what makes America so great, you know. It really isn't the people, it's not that, right? You know, because what Americans can do, other countries can do with their people. It's the fact that everybody can come here and thrive on whatever it is that they want to do, you know, given the fact that this is a landmass and the people want it, who landmass it is, they're not nationalistic, you know. So when you come to a country that's been dethroned, brainwashed, whitewashed, you know, then the tendency is there to say you can extort without feeling a liability or guiltiness. And that happens. I'm not wondering, you know, if, am I Indian? Am I black? Am I, you know, am I mulatto? Am I a Tunjan? You know, I'm not wondering about that stuff. I'm wondering about, is America going to pass a law to protect Africans as they are here and as they come? Like a lot of young Africans, right? And like, I just sit back and I just go through different channels and I just look at people and I try to learn from their experiences. And I notice like a lot of young people who are from Africa, right? They feel the pressures of fitting into society that they shouldn't necessarily feel, that I felt, right? So when you have someone who is like a light brown tone who says things like, you know, they come here and they try to fit into our culture and we don't accept them brashly, that makes me wonder about, you know, what affordability is this person allowed to have? What is the White House seeing? What is the State Houses seeing? The Senate, the representative? What are they seeing that I'm not seeing? And they can't just divvy up people and say, okay, the dark-skinned people can get this and the light-skinned people can get this. And Because I think that's what's ultimately going to go. Anytime people talk about centralized governments, anytime that centralized government is using the same census as populism, that's where you know it's going. And I heard this, was said by Ibrahim Traore. Like he said, we're not a democracy necessarily, we're populist. So when I hear him say things like that, I know what the African heads of states are thinking. I know what the people on the ground are thinking, you know. And you have people they're in Burkina Faso who are from America, right? Who don't necessarily tell these truths, but who grab the low-hanging fruit and kind of shy away from the opinion that's given to that. You see what I mean? Like, if I see my brother or my sister say, I don't like Africans, right? As a person would there, what is a local to say about that if, this person is not defending that truth? What are they going to say about that when they see, this person here from America are bringing more people over there after they just discredited, the whole of that continent, now they've had a change of heart, And like, I try to get people to think, and like my videos, right, I leave them public because, I know, CT, he feels the same way, I know Supreme Chief Holiday, he feels the same way. I know a lot of people feel this way, right? I think a lot of people see the things that I see, and they may not necessarily talk about it, But, if we're being honest about what people are saying when we're not present, as opposed to when we are present, how do you exchange that? How do you exchange that value? You know what I mean? Am I supposed to give you more value? How does that work? So as we kind of continue to live out our passion for expressing who we are, right? Because most Sentinels, they operate from a level of love. They operate from a level of respect. They're not hurt by the feeling of, well, my mother, she was the mother who had me and I was the only child who looked like her, that type of thing. It's never that. And like Dr. Umar Johnson said, you have light-skinned people who hate dark-skinned people. You have dark-skinned people who can't stand light-skinned people. So there's that yin and there's that yang. There's the duality clause. So I think, like, you have Donald Trump in there, and he's trying to get the black vote. He freed a political prisoner, I think, the other day on federal charges, federal conspiracies. But he didn't do it for the other guy, who is from Woodlawn, Chicago. He didn't do it for him. You know what I mean? So one was suspected of conspiracy. One was expected. No, one was basically expected to have committed conspiracy to commit terrorism. The other was expected to have committed murder for hire. So it's like, you look at this stuff, man, like the politics of like black men, because like you see the black men who are commenting about all the stuff that Trump has been doing, freeing rappers, like, and again, like, it's like, what cause does it has forget their politics. The thing is, what cause does it have when it's put in the media where people have to see it? You know, because like, and the squirrels back there, they're going crazy. But the thing you see is that why does the joint of the populism, right? Like, why is the joint of it have to be rap? You know, because, you know, rap is poisonous. Like, the lyrics is poisonous. You know, it's the rap that you hear, right? It comes with the heavy stone. You know, the edges are very sharp and rigid. You know, it's very graveled. You know, so when you have a person who's rapping about killing people, beating women, selling drugs, plotting on young generations, right? Telling the young man to do this or telling the young woman to do that, you know, to get even with a enemy, right? When you have stuff like that being put in lyrics, well, if you're responsible enough to know what English is, you don't necessarily take it to that degree, but you do understand that a level of correctness has to be endowed on the people who are influencing this type of culture. I can't be rapping about any of that stuff, right? Because I have an obligation to my brand, I have an obligation to my community, and I have an obligation to my parents. You know, as someone who doesn't have children yet. So gradually, right, you'll continue to see the love desire, the love component. You'll continue it to see to leave. You'll continue to see it kind of blind the passion of others, right? Because like hate, it doesn't last long, you know. Either a person reacts and put themselves in a position where they didn't read their outer war, or, you know, they kind of forget that, you know, God made them in a way where they were sabotaged to believe that others were below them, you know, in a degree that others couldn't love, others, you know, couldn't exist in their own right, or others couldn't be passionate about something that they believe in, or even want to believe in as it relates to, you know, having a nationality or having a language or having a custom that others may not like, you know, or having an appearance, you know, like a lot of us get judged for our appearances. You know, you get clowned if you live in a community where it's all blacks or all browns or all yellows, right? However you want to term it. Because, like, I know a lot of people are tired of hearing that word black. But we get clowned for, you know, reading. We get clowned for reading books. We get clowned for speaking languages that, you know, we've created, right? You know, we get clowned for just about anything where nature says this person is going to ostracize you just off the basis of the laws of being prejudiced. You know, there's no legalities in being prejudiced. You know, there's no legalities. The only influence that you have with being an influencer of hate or being, you know, a person who prejudges others is that, you know, you were made to exacerbate a feeling that you get that you can't necessarily control. We eat the wrong foods, right? That influences hate. You know, we do all these different things. And we don't understand, man. Like, we don't understand, like, culture is the end game. Culture is the end game. If you're going to live in a place that accepts learning, you have to accept the experiences of other people. Culture doesn't say you attack others or you be unsympathetic toward someone else's problems. You know, it doesn't say that. Culture says you meet someone and you ingratiate yourself. You know, that's basically what culture says. It says you accept people who may be coming along the path you're taking. Doesn't say your path, the path you are taking, you know. But this element that I see, this gang element where, you know, people may not necessarily announce they're part of a gang element, you know. When you push people for looking different, this is the same person who attacks you for walking on the sidewalk, you know. So the U.S. government, they have to get serious about, you know, passing bills that deal with anti-discrimination and also anti-xenophobia. They have to do that because it's clear. Africans are here in America and they're here to stay, you know, whether they be of American descent, of Asian descent, of European descent, like Giannis, or whether they of African descent, that is African. You have to understand something. People have just as much right to live, just as the next person. You know, God didn't say, you know, this person can't exist because they speak this way, or they think this way, or they talk this way, or they look this way, or they walk this way, or they wear this way, or they smell this way. It's nothing in that essence, you know. Great peace, and remember, Aniwe Kasi, Tishi, Kwazalahu, Mehindi, Yasil Alusa, Shepe Haliso, Fanny Lou.